January 17th, 1781. A confident British commander rides across a frozen cattle field believing victory is already his. He commands one of the finest fighting forces in the world. Across from him stand exhausted American farmers, hunters, and part-time soldiers who have every reason to lose. Less than 1 hour later, that elite British army will be destroyed by a trap so brilliant that military academies still teach it more than 2 centuries later. This wasn't luck. It wasn't superior numbers. It was a masterpiece of psychology, deception, and battlefield strategy, created by a self-taught backwoods general who understood one simple truth better than any professional officer alive. The real question isn't how the Americans won. It is why the British never realized they had already lost until the trap snapped shut. Banastre Tarleton had every reason to feel unstoppable. At just 26 years old, he had already built a terrifying reputation across the American colonies. His cavalry moved with incredible speed, his attacks were relentless, and wherever he appeared, Patriot militia often scattered before his bayonets ever reached them. To the British command, Tarleton represented the future of modern warfare, fast, aggressive, and utterly unforgiving. The men following him that freezing January morning were some of Britain's finest. Veteran infantry, experienced cavalry, soldiers trained through years of discipline, drilled until every movement became instinct. They had faced professional armies across Europe and expected little trouble from another force of exhausted American militia. After all, history seemed to be on their side. The American Revolution itself appeared to be slipping away. Only months earlier, Charleston had fallen in one of the worst disasters the Continental Army had ever suffered. Thousands of American soldiers had marched into British captivity. Across South Carolina, Loyalist militias hunted Patriot supporters, burning farms, intimidating families, and tightening British control with every passing week. To many observers, the Southern campaign was already over. The rebellion looked like it was dying. General George Washington desperately needed someone capable of turning the situation around. His answer was Nathanael Greene. When Greene reached the South, what he found barely resembled an army. Hungry soldiers, worn-out equipment, almost no supplies. Many of his men lacked proper clothing for the freezing winter. Desertion was common. Morale was dangerously low. Most commanders would have concentrated every remaining soldier into one desperate defensive force. Greene did the exact opposite. He divided his tiny army in half. It sounded almost suicidal. One half stayed under Greene's direct command. The other, roughly 600 men, marched west under Brigadier General Daniel Morgan. To many British officers, Morgan seemed like an unusual choice for such an important mission. He wasn't born into wealth. He had never attended a military academy. He had never studied classical battlefield theory in Europe. Long before becoming a general, Daniel Morgan had earned his living hauling heavy wagons through the rough wilderness of Virginia. He knew forests better than formal parade grounds. He knew ordinary frontiersmen better than polished officers. But what Morgan lacked in formal education, he more than made up for through experience. Years earlier, during the French and Indian War, a British officer ordered Morgan punished after a violent disagreement. The sentence was brutal 500 lashes. The whip tore into his back again, and again, and again. And again, the scars remained with him for the rest of his life. Morgan would later joke that the drummer had miscounted and the British still owed him one more lash. It sounded like humor. In reality, it revealed something much deeper. Daniel Morgan never forgot, and he never forgave. When the American Revolution began, he immediately volunteered, leading a company of expert Virginia riflemen. Over the following years, he fought through some of the bloodiest campaigns of the war. At Quebec, he survived a musket ball through the neck. At Saratoga, his riflemen helped destroy General Burgoyne's invading army by eliminating British officers with astonishing long-range accuracy. Battle after battle taught Morgan lessons no classroom ever could. More importantly, he learned something nearly every other American commander misunderstood. Not every soldier should fight the same way. Most Continental officers looked at militia and saw unreliable cowards. Morgan saw ordinary civilians, farmers, hunters, blacksmiths, men with courage but very little military training. That distinction would change everything. Morgan understood that courage and capability were not the same thing. A militia soldier might willingly risk his life to defend his home, but that did not mean he could stand shoulder to shoulder with seasoned British regulars in an open field. Professional soldiers spent years learning how to hold formation while cannonballs exploded around them, while volleys tore gaps through their ranks, and while bayonets charged directly toward them, civilians simply were not trained for that kind of warfare. Most generals treated this as a weakness that had to be overcome. Morgan treated it as a reality that had to be used. That single shift in thinking became the foundation of one of history's greatest tactical masterpieces. When word arrived that Banastre Tarleton was racing toward him with more than 1,000 elite British troops, Morgan knew he had very little time. Running forever was impossible. Eventually, Tarleton would catch him somewhere. So Morgan decided something extraordinary. He would choose exactly where that fight would happen. His destination was a quiet cattle grazing field known as the Cowpens in northern South Carolina. To his officers, the choice looked almost unbelievable. There were no stone walls, no thick forests, no swamps, no natural defenses. Even worse, the broad river flowed behind the American position, limiting any chance of escape if the battle went badly. Several officers questioned the decision. Why fight on open ground against Britain's best soldiers? Morgan simply smiled. Because the battlefield was never meant to protect his army. It was designed to trap the enemy. Everything about the location supported his plan. The gently rising hills would hide parts of his formation until the perfect moment. The wide open field would tempt Tarleton into attacking immediately, and the river behind his own troops removed the one option Morgan knew many militia would instinctively choose: running. But Morgan wasn't planning to force terrified civilians into a hopeless last stand. He intended something far more intelligent. That evening, while temperatures dropped below freezing, Morgan refused to remain inside his headquarters. Instead, he walked through the camp himself. One fire after another, one company after another, he spoke directly with ordinary soldiers. He laughed with them, shared old stories, calmed frightened young recruits. Then he explained the battle plan in language every man could understand. No complicated military terminology, no grand speeches about glory, just simple instructions. If you are in the first line, fall back. If you are in the second line, give me 2 good shots, then leave. If you are with the regulars, stand firm. If you are with the cavalry, wait. Your moment will come. Every soldier knew not only his own job, but exactly how his actions fit into the larger plan. That kind of personal leadership was almost unheard of during the 18th century. Morgan understood something modern military leaders still emphasize today. People fight better when they understand why they're doing something. By sunrise, fear had not disappeared, but confusion had. Now came the masterpiece of battlefield design. Morgan divided his force into 3 carefully arranged defensive lines. The first consisted of roughly 150 expert riflemen from Georgia and the Carolinas. These men were among the finest marksmen in North America. Unlike ordinary muskets, their long rifles could accurately strike targets hundreds of yards away. Morgan gave them only one mission: ignore the ordinary soldiers. Aim for the officers. Shoot the men giving commands. Shoot the men riding horses. Destroy leadership before the main battle even begins. Once they fired several carefully aimed shots, they were to retreat behind the second line. Waiting there were around 300 militia under Andrew Pickens. This was where Morgan completely abandoned conventional military thinking. He never expected these civilians to hold against a British bayonet charge. Instead, he looked every one of them in the eye and made a remarkably modest request. Just give me 2 good fires, boys. Only 2 volleys, not 20. Not until death. Just 2 accurate shots at close range. Then withdraw exactly as rehearsed. No panic, no sprinting. Simply move around the American left flank and reform behind the main army. Many commanders would have called such an order cowardice. Morgan called it strategy, because he knew exactly how Banastre Tarleton would interpret what happened next, and that misunderstanding would become the beginning of Britain's disaster. Before sunrise on January 17, 1781, Tarleton's exhausted column finally spotted the American position. His scouts returned with what sounded like excellent news. Morgan's army was standing in the open. There were no fortifications, no hidden defenses. A river blocked their retreat. To Tarleton, it looked like a trapped enemy making one final desperate stand. Exactly what he wanted. The young British commander never stopped to question why an experienced officer like Daniel Morgan would willingly choose such an exposed battlefield. Confidence had become his greatest weakness. Every previous victory reinforced the same belief: attack hard enough, and American militia would collapse. So instead of resting his men after an exhausting night march, instead of carefully studying the ground, instead of sending additional scouts to search for hidden troops, Tarleton gave the order to attack immediately. It was the decision Morgan had been waiting for. As the British line advanced across the frozen pasture, the first crack of rifle fire echoed through the cold morning air. One British officer fell from his horse. Then another. A sergeant collapsed. Commands became harder to hear. Confusion spread before the main battle had even begun. Morgan's riflemen weren't trying to stop the advance. They were quietly removing its leadership. After firing with deadly precision, they slipped backward exactly as instructed, disappearing behind the second American line. From Tarleton's perspective, everything appeared perfectly normal. The Americans were already retreating. His confidence grew. The British infantry continued forward in disciplined formation, bayonets glistening beneath the pale winter sun. Their drums beat steadily, keeping perfect rhythm as hundreds of red-coated soldiers marched toward the waiting militia. This was the moment they had rehearsed countless times. Close the distance. Break the enemy. Finish the battle. When the British reached roughly 50 yards, Andrew Pickens gave the signal. 300 muskets exploded almost simultaneously. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder. A wall of smoke swallowed the battlefield. British soldiers dropped instantly. Entire sections of the front rank disappeared beneath the devastating volley. Before the smoke fully drifted away, the militia calmly reloaded. Many British officers expected panic. Instead, they watched disciplined hands pour powder, ram home fresh balls, raise muskets once more, and unleash a second crushing volley. More British soldiers crashed into the frozen grass. The advance slowed, the formation staggered. Then something happened that seemed to confirm every assumption Tarleton had ever made about American militia. The second line turned around. They began moving away. Some walked quickly, others jogged. To British eyes, it looked exactly like another American collapse. Camden all over again. The militia were breaking. Victory was only seconds away. Tarleton's officers shouted for the pursuit. Excitement swept through the British ranks. Discipline disappeared. Instead of maintaining their carefully organized formations, soldiers surged forward at full speed. Each man wanted to be first to finish the fleeing Americans. Regimental lines stretched apart. Officers struggled to maintain control. Orders vanished beneath cheers, shouting, and pounding boots. The carefully drilled machine that had begun the attack transformed into an uncontrolled wave of momentum. And that single moment was the true beginning of Britain's defeat. Morgan wasn't merely defeating Tarleton on the battlefield. He was defeating him inside his own mind. Every instinct, every expectation, every lesson Tarleton believed about militia warfare was being used against him. Without realizing it, the British commander had stopped thinking strategically. He was simply reacting. Exactly as Morgan intended, the trap had not yet closed, but every step the British took carried them deeper inside it. The British surged over the gentle rise, expecting to find frightened militia running for their lives. Instead, they found an entirely different army. Standing shoulder to shoulder at the crest of the hill were nearly 450 Continental regulars under Lieutenant Colonel John Eager Howard. These weren't exhausted civilians. These were disciplined soldiers who had remained perfectly still while the British charge raced toward them. Howard watched the enemy close the distance. 40 yards, 30, 20. Then he gave the order. A perfectly timed volley erupted at almost point-blank range. The impact was devastating. British soldiers who had been charging only seconds earlier suddenly collapsed in rows. The front of the assault simply disintegrated beneath the blast of musket fire. Men stumbled into one another. Officers shouted conflicting commands. Smoke covered the hillside as the momentum that had carried the British forward suddenly came to a violent stop. Before they could recover, Howard issued another command, charge. The Continental line lowered bayonets and rushed forward. Now the hunters had become the hunted. For the first time that morning, experienced British regulars found themselves moving backward. But Daniel Morgan's masterpiece still wasn't complete. Hidden behind the second hill throughout the entire battle waited Lieutenant Colonel William Washington and his cavalry. The British had never seen them. They had never even suspected they were there. As Howard's infantry slammed into the confused British front, Washington's dragoons burst over the hill at full gallop. Dozens of horsemen thundered across the frozen field, sabers flashing in the winter sunlight. They crashed directly into the exposed British flank. The impact was explosive. Infantry already struggling against Howard's bayonet charge suddenly found cavalry cutting through their side. Units that had entered the battle in perfect formation were now being torn apart from multiple directions at once. Then came the final surprise, the militia. The very men Tarleton believed had fled in panic had never been running away. They had been following orders, exactly as Daniel Morgan instructed the night before. Having marched around the rear of the American position, Andrew Picken's militia now appeared on the opposite flank of the battlefield. They had reloaded their muskets. They had reformed their ranks, and now they were advancing once again. The British looked ahead and saw Howard's regulars. They looked right and saw Washington's charging cavalry. They looked left. And the militia they thought they had defeated were returning with loaded weapons. Within minutes, the British army was trapped inside a perfect double envelopment. It was one of history's greatest battlefield maneuvers. No escape, no room to regroup, no time to recover. Panic spread with incredible speed. Some British soldiers threw down their muskets and surrendered immediately. Others fought desperately in small circles, standing back to back until they were overwhelmed. Officers attempted to rally their men, but the battlefield had become complete chaos. Tarleton himself gathered what remained of his cavalry and launched one final desperate counterattack. William Washington intercepted him. The two commanders actually crossed swords during the melee, exchanging blows as horses collided around them. Washington suffered a wound, but Tarleton finally realized the battle could not be saved. With only a handful of mounted men still beside him, he turned and fled the field at full speed. The rest of his army had no such opportunity. In roughly 60 minutes, one of Britain's finest field forces had ceased to exist. More than 300 British soldiers were killed or wounded. Nearly 600 more surrendered. Entire artillery crews were captured along with their cannons. Tarleton had lost over 80% of his command. American losses: just 12 killed, around 60 wounded. Even today, military historians pause when they study those numbers because they seem almost impossible. But statistics alone don't explain why Cowpens became legendary. Daniel Morgan didn't win because he had more soldiers. He didn't win because he possessed superior weapons. He won because he understood something deeper than tactics. He understood people. He accepted that militia would never behave like professional regulars, and instead of fighting that reality, he built his entire strategy around it. Their withdrawal wasn't a mistake. It wasn't panic. It wasn't failure. It was the trap itself. Morgan manipulated not only British movements but British expectations. Every decision Tarleton made felt logical because Morgan had designed the battlefield to make those choices seem obvious. That is the hallmark of true strategic genius. The greatest commanders don't force the enemy into impossible decisions. They make the wrong decision feel inevitable. The victory at Cowpens shattered British confidence throughout the Southern campaign. Cornwallis, furious over the disaster, abandoned caution and launched an aggressive pursuit of Nathanael Greene. That relentless chase stretched British supply lines farther and farther until it finally ended months later at Yorktown. Many historians argue that the road to Britain's final surrender began on that quiet pasture in South Carolina. Today, Cowpens is peaceful. Rolling green hills replace the smoke of battle. Visitors walk across the same open field where farmers, hunters, shopkeepers, and backwoods riflemen outsmarted one of the world's greatest military powers. The landscape seems ordinary, but beneath that quiet ground lies one of history's greatest lessons. Victory doesn't always belong to the strongest army. Sometimes, it belongs to the commander who understands both his own soldiers and his enemy better than anyone else. And that is why, more than 2 centuries later, military academies around the world still teach the Battle of Cowpens, not simply as a victory, but as one of the most brilliant tactical traps ever executed.